If you've ever managed a team or, just been managed by another human, you know the struggle, right? How do you push for great results without being a jerk? Or how do you stay a decent person without letting things slide? Well, today we're diving into Kim Scott's brilliant management philosophy, Radical Candor, to find the answer.
Just imagine this for a second. You've just fired someone, and those are the first words out of their mouth. Why didn't you tell me? That question, it just hangs there in the air. It's an accusation, really, that you weren't honest, that you let them fail.
This is a true story. It's exactly what happened to Kim Scott, the author of Radical Candor. After she finally fired an employee, he looked her right in the eye and asked that absolutely soul-crushing question. And that one moment, that painful, awful moment, revealed a huge flaw in her management style. And really, it kicked off her whole journey to find a better way to lead.
So what happened? How did things get so bad? Well, it all started with a guy Scott calls Bob. And Bob was awesome. He was friendly, he was kind, everybody on the team liked him instantly. Sounds like the perfect hire, right? Yeah, not so much.
So here's the play-by-play. Scott hires Bob, and pretty quickly she realizes his work is, well, it's terrible. But she liked him. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, so she just said nothing. For 10 months. 10 agonizing months, she dodged that difficult conversation. And in the meantime, the rest of her team had to pick up his slack. Morale was in the tank. And finally, with everyone about to quit, she had no choice left. She had to fire him.
And right there, that's the heart of the problem. Her desire to be nice, to spare Bob's feelings in the moment, was actually the cruelest thing she could have done. It ended in disaster for Bob, for her team, and for the whole company. Her kindness was a complete and total failure. So, okay, how do you actually fix a problem like that? Scott learned the answer during her time at places like Google and Apple. And the big lesson was this. Being a great boss isn't about having power or being the one who makes all the calls. It's about something way more fundamental. What Scott finally realized is that your main job as a boss isn't just to get results. It's to guide your team so they can achieve amazing results. And you simply cannot guide people if they don't trust you. At the end of the day, power doesn't get the best work out of people. Strong relationships do. So, with this huge insight, Scott developed a framework, something simple but incredibly powerful, to solve this whole dilemma, a way to be a great boss and a good human being. She calls it Radical Candor. And it's all built on two super simple ideas. First, you have to care personally. Basically, give a damn. See your colleagues as actual human beings, not just job titles. And second, you have to challenge directly. This means it's your job, your responsibility, to tell people the truth about their work, when it's great and when it's not. Now, when you put those two axes together, you get this really useful 4-quadrant grid. The goal, of course, is to be in that top right corner, radical candor. But to really get what that means, we've got to first look at the traps we all fall into when we get the balance wrong. To really understand what radical candor looks like, Scott tells this great story about her puppy who was just totally out of control. One day, the puppy bolts toward traffic, and a complete stranger says to her, "I can see you really love your dog, but that dog is going to die if you don't teach her to sit." He then tells the dog to sit, and bam, it works. As he walked away, he said, "It's not mean, it's clear." See? He cared enough about the dog to step in, and he challenged her directly enough to actually make a difference. That's radical candor. Okay, so what happens when we don't get it right? Well, most of our mistakes as managers tend to fall into one of 3 traps, which pop up when we fail on one or even both of those dimensions. The first and, let's be honest, the most common trap is ruinous empathy. This is what happens when you genuinely care about someone, but you're just too scared to hurt their feelings or start a conflict, so you don't challenge them. You avoid giving criticism, and even your praise ends up being kind of vague and useless. So if you look at the grid, ruinous empathy is high on care personally, but way down low on challenge directly. It feels really kind and safe in the moment, but like we saw, this is the exact path that leads to so much more pain and failure later on. This is it. This is it. This is exactly, and I mean exactly, the trap Kim Scott fell into with Bob. She cared about him for sure, but because she failed to challenge him directly, she basically set him up to fail. She hurt her team's morale, and in the end, she still had to fire him. It was empathy, all right, but it was totally ruinous. All right, next up we have obnoxious aggression. This is when you're great at challenging people, but you completely fail to show that you actually care. Your feedback just sounds like an attack, and any praise you give feels phony or like a backhanded compliment. This is the classic competent jerk quadrant.
Now, here's the crazy part. Scott says that while this is definitely not good, it's actually better than the other traps. Why? Because at least it's clear. People know exactly where they stand and what the problem is. It's not great, but it beats being left in the dark.
And that brings us to the absolute worst place you can be: manipulative insincerity. This is what happens when you don't care enough to be real with people, and you don't care enough to challenge them. It's just fake praise, backstabbing, and political games.
This quadrant right here is where trust goes to die. It's completely dishonest. It creates this toxic, paranoid environment where nobody feels safe, and you can be sure that no great work is ever going to get done. It is the absolute worst of both worlds.
Okay, so how do you actually practice this stuff? There's a perfect story from Scott's time at Google with her then boss, Sheryl Sandberg, that shows exactly how it's done.
So, get this. Scott had just crushed a big presentation to Google's founders. It went great, and she was feeling on top of the world. Afterwards, Sheryl Sandberg pulls her aside, gives her some genuine praise, and then says, "But you said a lot." Scott just kind of brushed it off, thinking, okay, whatever, it's a small thing. But Sandberg didn't let her off the hook. When Scott made a dismissive hand gesture, Sandberg called her out on it right then and there. She realized her softer approach wasn't getting through, so she dialed up the directness, making it crystal clear that this was important and she was trying to help.
And then Sandberg delivered the killer line. Wow, it was brutally direct, but it was also so deeply caring. Of course it stung a little, but it worked because it started from a place of respect. Sandberg believed Scott was smart and wanted her to be perceived that way. She cared enough to risk the discomfort, and she challenged directly enough to actually make a change. That right there is perfect radical candor.
So we've spent all this time talking about how to give better feedback. But here's the twist. The real first step in radical candor isn't dishing it out. It's proving you can take it. So the real question to leave you with is this. Are you ready to ask your team to be radically candid with you?